name is Heather McGee, and this is the Happily Never After, a podcast that explores how life's endings can lead to a personal breakthrough. Because sometimes the end is just the beginning. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Happily Never After, a podcast where we explore how life's endings can lead to a new beginning. If you enjoy the show, don't forget to rate, review, and follow us wherever you are listening or watching the show today. My guest today is Vanessa Bennett. Vanessa is a licensed depth psychotherapist, author, and facilitator devoted to the lifelong work of coming home to the self. Her latest book, The Motherhood Myth, explores how patriarchy, capitalism, and generational trauma have shaped our narratives around parenting, partnership, and identity, and how we begin the process of coming home to ourselves. Now, today, we are actually focusing mainly on a different subject, something pretty big that happened in Vanessa's life. Her work became even more personal after she lost her home in the Altadena fires in January of this year. Vanessa, I'm so pleased to welcome you to the show.
I'm so glad to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
Let's start off with, I think this is like 101. Can you
Yeah.
explain firstly what depth psychology is for those who might be unfamiliar with that term?
Yeah, it's a question I get a lot, right? Even when you're like a depth psychotherapist.
So let me
It's
think.
a bit of a tongue twister. Mostly because people are used to saying depth psychologist, and psychologist is the PhD level, right? So I'm always like, not that yet. Not that yet.
Just to
Yet.
the left.
Just to the left. So depth psychology is really the umbrella term that's used to describe analytical psychology, archetypal psychology. It's Jungian psychology, right? And so they call depth psychology the psychology of the soul. It's rooted in Jung's work. It is really a psychology that is meant to humanize and to essentially see the human to human, soul to soul connection between clinician and client. We really work with more what's going on beneath the surface. So, speaking the language of the unconscious, which is not the typical language that we're used to, right? The unconscious speaks to us in metaphor and image and dream, symbolism, right? Synchronicity, things like this. And so we get kind of beneath the surface, if you will. And so of course there's things like behavioralism and things like that, but it's really more about your soul's trajectory in this lifetime, right? This path of individuation, if you will.
Okay, got it. Thank you. I was
Mhm.
wondering, because I read about it, because I first saw that term actually in your book, and I was like, what does that mean? So I did a little bit of looking into it, and it's very fascinating. So thank you
Yeah.
for explaining that. Now, something big happened to you earlier this year. On the show, we talk about how life's endings lead to a new beginning, and your story is a big example of that. You helped so many other people, and then life came and got you in a big way
Mm.
earlier this year. Can you talk to us about what happened?
Yeah, so I, like many others in California, was part of the wildfires that happened in January. I mean, wildfires happen all the time, right, in California, but this combination of the Palisades fire and then the fire that happened in Altadena, the Eden fire, at the same time, is now being called the most destructive or the most deadliest in the state's history. So I was in Altadena. And so we didn't just lose our home, which I've had a lot of people come to me and say, I understand my grandmother, my aunt, whatever, they had an electrical fire, they lost their house. And I appreciate when people come up and say that, but the difference is that we lost our entire community. Right. So we didn't just lose our home and everything in it. We actually lost everything around us, all of our support systems, our schools, our grocery stores, our restaurants, our everything. Right. So it was like next level on top of losing all your personal things.
Now, whenever the fire started and you evacuated, what were you feeling in that moment? Did you take much with you? Like,
No,
how serious did you think it was?
we took nothing with us. So again, fires happen a lot in Los Angeles, right? Every year we have the season where the Santa Ana winds kick up, and usually there's wildfires that start because of the winds. And in 2020, we had a fire start right behind our house in the hills that we live in. And we took some stuff. Usually what happens is the power goes out. And so, because they cut the power to try to stop fires. It's
Right.
not the opposite of what happened this time, which we can get into in a little while. And so we gathered our then 6-month-old baby. My mom was visiting, and we all went down the hill to Pasadena and got a hotel and just rode it out for a night or two until the power came back on. Came back and everything was fine. Right. So we kind of thought it would be exactly the same thing. So we, packed an overnight bag and took my 5-year-old out of bed. She was sleeping at the time, and put her in the car and drove down to the same hotel thinking that we would do another overnight and come back in the morning.
For now, that is just so huge to have lost. You came back with your lives, which is huge, but you
Mhm.
lost everything else, including your
Mhm.
community, as you mentioned. Are people going back to that area, or are most people moving on? Like, what does life look like now in that area?
Honestly, it's a bit of a graveyard. I mean, there are houses that are still standing. Um, some people might not understand this, but my friends, those of us who have lost houses, have actually said, as crazy as this sounds, I almost would rather be in our situation than in the situation of like the one house on the block that's randomly standing, because it's still completely destroyed from smoke damage. And the insurance companies are fighting them to give them anything. Right. So they were almost forced to go back into this highly toxic, environmentally toxic, but also just emotionally horrible situation, because, again, the insurance companies are trying to say that it's not the same thing. Right. So there are these like random houses on these blocks that are still standing. There are people who obviously parts of Altadena that didn't burn that are still there. But the overall feeling when you go is very heavy. I mean, it is just decimation as far as the eye can see. There's nothing.
Are you still in contact with your neighbors? Were you close to your community there?
Yeah, very close. Hmm.
You moved. You made a big change and moved your whole family down to Costa Rica, which is,
Hmm.
to me, sounds like such a huge, like that is a lot in 1 year. What has that been like for you navigating this?
Yeah, I mean, so to kind of go back to the neighbor conversation, I think in the very beginning, well, first thing, I mean, immediately in the next morning after finding out the houses, all of our houses were gone, I kind of went into immediate community mode and found a huge Airbnb that was about an hour away and gathered up a couple of the families, and we all went down there, kids. I mean, it was chaos for, a week in this house together, but I think it was actually what everybody needed. And what I will say is that after a huge traumatic event like that, it takes a while to figure out what your next steps are, right? It feels like it every day there's a new next step. First of all, you're inundated with like the things you have to do. But then it's like, okay, this feels right. And then you do that and then it's like, no, that's not right. Okay, this feels right. So the decision to move out of the country, it didn't feel like a big decision to make. It actually felt in some weird way like we'd been talking about exploring living internationally for a long time. And in some way, it felt like, well, if not now, when? Right. And it came pretty naturally for us when our daughter finished her school that year. We were like, yeah, now's the time. And we had gone down and visited. I've been to Costa Rica many times, and it just felt like it was time to downshift.
Do you feel like you have, I mean, I have to imagine the answer is no, that you haven't processed this. I'm just going to guess that this is not fully processed yet. Have you found peace in what has happened? Like, how are you feeling about it now? I mean, it's still kind
Yeah,
of fresh. I know it's 9 months later, but I think when something's this big, it takes longer to
it
deal with it.
totally does. So what's interesting, right? And obviously, I'll kind of bring the like therapeutic lens into it here. What I guess I've had to reckon with, and logically, I think a lot of us know this, what I'm about to say, but then being in it, it's very different. People's coping styles are so different. And when something massive happens, right, your coping mechanisms get kind of amped up. And so often there's been so many, let's say, divorces through this, right? Because again, our coping skills are different and they start to
Yeah.
butt up against each other. And so in my close group of community, and then even between my partner and I, seeing how we all process it and experience it differently from the jump has been really difficult. So like, for example, that very first week that we were all in an Airbnb together, just trying to figure out, our kids need underwear, that kind of thing. Um, a lot of us were crying every minute and lamenting and in the angry phase. And then, and then my partner would come in and say, yeah, but like now we get to rebuild and turn the garage toward the sunset like we always wanted. And I was like, okay, you need to stop talking.
Yeah.
That is not helping. I might hurt you. Like, just shut it up. And so you start to see the ways that people cling to things or push things away or see things differently. And it can be really hard to be in relationship with somebody who's processing it so differently. And so the process for me has been, you're right. I mean, it's been 9-10 months. It's very slow. It comes in waves. And the best that I can do is allow it the space to come up. Like, I'll give you a perfect example. This morning, just this morning, my daughter, who's 5, said to me, we're actually decided to build a house here in Costa Rica, and I had to have them put a bathtub in because bathtubs are not typically something they put in Costa Rica homes, and she really
Yeah.
wants a bathtub.
She's sick. She needs a
She's,
bathtub
she needs a
for her
bathtub.
spa time.
Exactly. And so she just said to me this morning, out of nowhere, unprompted, she said, "Mom, did our house in Altadena have a bathtub?" And I was like, "It did." And I said, "You don't remember what the bathroom looks like, do you?" And she said, "No, I don't. I don't really remember much of what the house looks like." And I kind of brushed it off. I like kind of, and I went about getting her ready and out the door. And I came in for my meditation, which I usually do right when I put her on the bus. And I just lost it and it broke. And I like cut the
Yeah, I can
meditation
see as a
short.
mom that would feel so, sad,
Yeah,
because it's where you brought your baby home.
that's right. That's exactly right. And I knew that she wouldn't remember. I knew that logically, and partly that's a good thing. Partly I feel like the silver lining is that she's not going to have many memories of this experience. But the reality of that, of her saying to me, like, I don't remember what the inside of the house looks like, was just something I wasn't prepared for, you know? And so you process it in bits as it comes up, and you sit with that grief and you allow it space and you feel it and you cry. And it's just like, it's like a puzzle. It's like a million piece puzzle, you
Well,
know?
something you're saying is actually making me think about a passage in your new book.
Mm,
There's a section, and it's really like, to be honest, what this show is all about, and something that I think about quite a bit too, about liminal space, about in the dark night of the soul in the trenches, and it's so hard and so difficult. And but that's where you change. Gosh, it is so hard. Like, I think about, my father died about a year ago. I have many siblings, and
mm,
we all dealt with it very, very differently.
differently.
And to your point, sometimes someone would say something in a way, it's like, "Oh, that really hurts." It's like jagged glass on what I, because
Yeah,
you're dealing with it, they're dealing with it, but you wanna create space. Everyone should be able to process the way that they process, and we know that,
that's
but
right.
it's also, like, so painful. I think it's one of the most challenging spaces to be in, but to your point from your book, that's where change happens, is going all
Mm-hmm.
the way down there, dealing
Mm-hmm.
with it, and then you come out, hopefully in a better place, or having learned some things that you can take into the rest of your life.
Yeah, I mean, that is, so you do know depth psychology because the liminal space is a
I
depth
just didn't
is a
know what it
depth
was called.
turn. It's a depth term. That is a Jungian term, actually. So, yeah, I mean, look, I talk a lot about in the book too, and again, a lot of the kind of Jungian way of thinking in this, and this is this idea of death and rebirth, right? And so, life is nothing but a series of deaths and rebirths. Right. And so when we say death, obviously we mean metaphorical. And, on my arm, I have a tattoo of the Ouroboros, which is the snake eating its own tail. And that is the symbol of death and rebirth, which I got, funny enough, 2 months before the fire happened. But it's exactly that. You cannot have rebirth without first having death. Right. And it's after the death when we descend into the darkness, which is that liminal space where the thrashing and the discomfort and the questioning and the instability and all of these things happen in order to hopefully integrate, kind of put the pieces together a little bit differently than they were before, and then we're able to be reborn in whatever this new way is. Right. I think unfortunately we live in a culture that doesn't really honor and respect these processes of death and rebirth. And so biologically we grow and we change, right, and we move forward, but oftentimes I see people not psychologically or emotionally evolving and growing and changing because we don't really make space for it in our culture.
Now, you have said that this experience that you've gone through this year has taught you quite a bit about resilience. What did you mean by that?
So I think, first of all, going back to what we were saying about everybody experiencing it different, right? I think it's been a little bit of seeing that, but feeling it, and kind of going back to what you were saying about your siblings, doing the work around not personalizing that everybody is experiencing this different, right? And how resiliency actually looks very different. Um, I kind of always knew that I was, we'll say air quote, resilient in the fact that, like, it's the way I grew up. I was had a single mom, and we oftentimes we were not high income by any means. Struggled quite a bit growing up, and I think that a lot of my experiences gave me a feeling of resilience. But I've realized through my own therapy work, honestly, not even just in being a therapist, that there is a difference really in resiliency, as in I can survive, which is great. That's important. Okay. And emotional resiliency, which actually is I'm bendable, I'm malleable. I can have the experience like I just said about this morning, where I can feel the feelings, I can sit with myself, I can allow the pain, I can acknowledge it, I can respect it, I can give space to it, and then I can move forward, right? A lot of us have the like I can survive type resiliency, but we don't really have the emotional resiliency to feel the hard things. We numb them, we run from them, we hide from them. We don't make space for them. And so I talk a lot with clients about the importance of building both. It's not just the pull yourself up by the bootstraps type resiliency that a lot of us are taught in the West. There is a certain amount of resiliency that needs to be worked on emotionally.
What you're making me think about is it's exactly what you just described. The difference, to play it back, the
Mhm.
difference between avoiding what's going on,
Mhm.
avoiding your feelings in
Mhm.
a toxic way, and then resilience in getting through something that is very difficult, feeling those things. But it takes time, and I don't know that it's wrong to like distract yourself sometimes, through that process. What are some of the things that you think about that can be most helpful in going down the more positive road, the road that is healthy resilience, healthy processing? Like, sometimes life is so hard. I have to be honest. I think it's hard to choose that path. It's very,
Agreed.
very difficult to do that with divorce. When people get diagnosed, when they lose their house in such a violent way, how do you do that?
Yeah. I mean, first and foremost, you don't do it alone. We have to do it in community. We have to be witnessed. There is profound power in being witnessed. We are a very isolated society, and we are taught that leaning on or needing support is somehow weak, and it couldn't be further from the truth, right? And so that trope, like you can't do it alone, it's not meant to be done alone, is very true. So there's that. I think that also, I like to talk to my clients about this idea of it's got to be baby steps. It's like this process of if you think about your kind of range of resilience, right, which is our kind of psychology term for it. If you're starting out with a very narrow range of resilience, so let's say you grew up, most of us did, without having the tools, without having the skills, right, to sit with big emotions, to
Gen
process
Xers
things.
here.
Elder millennial, right?
Yeah.
Um, and so you're literally starting as a baby, right? So you probably have a pretty narrow range. That's okay. That's normal. That's to be expected. What happens is you don't throw yourself into the deep end right away. You kind of work on it in increments where you slowly stretch, right? Think about stretching a muscle. You're not just going to suddenly be able to touch your toes if you've never been able to do that before. You have to do it a little bit every single day until the muscles loosen and they stretch. It's the same thing with building resiliency. So yes, you've been thrown into something traumatic, right? So for me, obviously, it was the fires. For somebody else, it could be a divorce or a death, right? Or the loss of a career or something. Somebody says to you, okay, you just have to be able to sit with it and feel the feelings. You might be like, yeah, right, right? I can't do that. And I don't judge that. I'm like, I get that. You don't feel like you have the skills to do that. You can't do the extreme of like, well, I'm just not going to then. I mean, you can make that choice, but you're not really growing, right? Or what you can do is look at it as I'm going to do these slow stretches to slowly build my capacity. So, can I make a commitment to myself that for, let's say, 5 minutes a day, I'm going to sit with myself and allow the wash of grief and anger and pain to come up? Maybe I do some writing, maybe I do some audio notes around it. I take a walk and audio note around it. And then I go, okay, we're done with that now. Close the book and I go back to doing what I was doing, right? I think a lot of people think that being able to process something means that you're just going to like lament all day and it's going to completely overpower you. And that's just not realistic. We have bills to pay and kids to raise and we can't, right?
Well, and I've definitely gotten to a point exactly to what you are saying. I really don't. I have a lot of doubt that it's possible to heal from life's big
Hmm.
events in isolation. Like, I
I
think
agree.
it is absolutely necessary. Like, I'm thinking about, I know a lot of things in my life, like divorce, death, things like that. You get trapped in a dark cave,
Yes.
and people do it every day. They just retreat to it because they're embarrassed. They're embarrassed to talk about it. They're embarrassed to be vulnerable. It's hard. Some people don't have a community, and it's I have just come to a really strong opinion. I just don't see a world where I'm able to heal without having community and friends and people to talk to and a
Mm-mm.
therapy, therapeutic support and all of those things.
Mhm.
Like, I just don't think you can heal effectively in a cave by yourself.
No.
It's just not possible.
Well, and it's funny because my therapist reflected back to me how automatic it was for me amidst like in the hour of finding out that I was like, okay, we all need to go together to this house. Like we need to stay together. And we had a week of witnessing, and I mean we had longer than a week, but really in this small container of witnessing and being together and crying and being angry and struggling. And she was like, it was automatic. Like you didn't think twice about it. You just knew that's what you guys needed to do. Right. And I said, yeah, I mean, maybe it's enough of this work and enough of knowing this, I guess, just somehow seeps in. But it was like my being. I knew that this is what we needed. And not just us, but the kids, right? So the kids in their own ways were struggling, but in a very different way, right? Because some of the younger ones didn't even really understand what was going on. All they knew is that they had their friends and their cousins and their community together. So yes, I mean it's imperative. It's the way that human beings were designed to function, right? We would not have made it this far in an evolutionary perspective had we not had community. We're not actually supposed to be alone. We're not supposed to be loner type creatures, you know?
I'm curious. You've talked about yourself and described yourself as type A, organized, very methodical. Do you feel like that in any way? And I'm just imagining this part, but from what you described, I think it's accurate. Springing into action, taking care of things, getting things done. Well, you're trying to take care of everyone else, but it's happening to you too. Do you feel like that in any way got in your way in terms of connecting to what had happened to you personally?
I think it's a yes and. And here's why I say that. I think that for those of us who have done and continue to do a lot of inner work, understanding ourselves, understanding our patterns, making ourselves uncomfortable by trying to break patterns, I don't believe, and this is shadow work, I don't believe that any part of us should be necessarily cut out or thrown away, right? Every part is important so long as we understand it and we have we're in right relationship with it. So for me, yes, are those my survival skills that have been born from trauma? Of course, right? I am the overfunctioner that you want around in a crisis because I always say, a master compartmentalizer, right? Yes, that was very helpful to me and to all of my community in that moment. Could it have hindered me? Yes, if I hadn't already been the kind of person that was doing so much work around that for so long, that I had a level of awareness of, we're going to get to this, just not right now. I'm not going to completely never come back to it, which I think if you had asked me this question 15 years ago, I would have compartmentalized it, put it on a shelf, and pretended it wasn't there, right? I knew I would come back to it at some point. It just couldn't be in that moment because I had shit to do and things to take care of. So that's why I say it's a yes and. For me, it's a gift that I'm able to kind of go in and out of that, but it can be a curse if I'm not acting out of awareness around it because it really can be a hindrance to me feeling and processing these big changes.
Now, as you are looking forward, into a new, very different future in Costa Rica, and it sounds like you are committing to it, building a house, all of those things. What are you excited about?
Mm,
Are you able to be excited at this point?
that's a good question. I think I struggle with being excited in general. I think another one of my kind of personality traits that comes from childhood. I tend to be very pragmatic, right? I am excited. I'm excited almost via what's happening around me. So I'm excited for my daughter. I'm excited for her to get to have a childhood where she's dirty and she's at the beach and she's riding horses and she's learning Spanish, and that excites me honestly. I'm excited for the downshift. So it has been really nice for my nervous system to exhale and to be so close to the water. But I also, and I think this is also partly, again, you're talking about 15, 20 years of doing so much deep soul work. I don't really believe in absolutes. I sure as hell don't believe in absolutes now, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Like I will tell people, I'm like, cool, make a plan. Make a plan all
Good
you
luck.
want and then let the universe laugh at you, right? The second you're like, this is how it's going to be forever, the universe is like, hold my beer, right? Um, that's
The
what I've
sure way to make
realized.
sure it doesn't go the way that you want it to.
That's exactly right. But I do think to a certain extent I've always kind of lived in that mentality. So, for example, my daughter the other day said, "Are we going to stay in Costa Rica forever?" And first of all, she's 5. She doesn't really understand forever, right? The context of time. And I said, well, we're going to stay in Costa Rica so long as we're happy in Costa Rica. And she was like, yeah, but is it going to be forever? Like she can't really understand, you know?
She
And
might have some of your personality traits
just a
in
touch,
that question.
just a touch. A little scary. But I look at this as this is what feels right now. And so long as it feels right now, this is exciting, right? But I don't tend to feel like anything is forever, and maybe in that way that's helpful.
Yeah. Well, I think this is so going to be really helpful to so many people. I mean, it's I don't know. Sometimes just life delivers you such a shocker of an experience. It's like it renders you speechless. I know there've been a few things that have happened in my life. I'm like, wow, did not see that coming. But what is interesting, no matter how awful it was, I don't want to make it seem any better than it actually was. These horrible things happen in our lives. And what I think is interesting is, at least for me and a lot of the people I've been talking to years later, not now,
Mhm.
years later,
Mhm.
I'm able to smile about it and I'm able to
Mm,
look back on it and say that was a really terrible time in my life, but I'm okay now. Life ended up
mhm.
being working out just fine. I learned a lot through that experience. I don't want to go through it again. I'm not saying it was good. But I do think that's interesting about these things that in the moment feel so horrible and awful, but then years later you are able to look back on it and the pain is a little bit less.
I agree. And also, I'm a big believer in this. We can't jump to meaning making too soon. That is also a coping skill, right? And it can be helpful, but just like me and my compartmentalization, let it be helpful so long as you're aware that that's what you're doing so that you can come back later and be with the physical pain and grief, right, of what has happened. So I want somebody out there to hear that as well. Like, don't push yourself to make meaning too soon. Allow yourself those moments of tapping into the grief. Because if you don't, it will find a way later to come out, whether that's somatically, whether that's relationally. It doesn't go away just because you pretend it's not there right now. Right. So we've got to
Yeah.
give ourselves these moments of expanding that window of tolerance.
And you can't put a time box on it either.
No.
I know for me, there have been times where, and other people I've spoken to, where the reaction is, I feel like I'm not supposed to be upset about this anymore. And it
Mm,
takes so much longer to heal from these
yes.
things or process than you would like. Like someone's like, well, my dad died a year ago. I shouldn't still be upset. That's like
Ugh.
such a blink of an eye. It takes like 5 times as long to get over big life events than you think.
Well, it's
Well,
also
not
not
get over, get
linear.
through. I
Get
should say
through.
get through.
Thank you. So first of all, I was going to say, I hate the term get over, hate
Yeah,
it. I
because you
say this to my
don't.
clients all the time. It's not about getting over, right? It's integration. It's not getting over. But also, yeah, healing is not linear. So cool, you feel great today. Tomorrow you might not. And that's normal. We have to normalize the fact that there's, to your point, no such thing as a timeline. Everyone's different, but also that it doesn't look linear. Like I was just saying about this morning, having a moment of like breaking down. So giving ourselves the space without shame to be able to just be wherever we're at in the process is so important. And it's not something we do in this culture either, because again, we don't give the honor and the respect to these death processes, to death in general, literal death, but also the processes of death and rebirth. And it does a real disservice to us on an emotional and a soul level.
Now, I do want to spend a little time talking about your new book, The
Mm,
Motherhood Myth. I have read it, and something I was telling Vanessa right before we started, and then I stopped myself because you got to hit record when we have these conversations. I have read your book, and what I love about it, and I think this is such a hard target to hit, is that the book is very validating. It's very validating of these, I would call them insecurities, but I think I might start calling them realities because I've been like things you feel insecure about, and I'm like, wait a minute, I think almost everyone feels this way and we're just like embarrassed to say so. You validate all of those things in a really raw way. But what I think is interesting and great is you are also challenging. It's also a challenging book. Like this is real, but this is what you can do about it. Are you going
mhm.
to do something about it? It addresses all the ways that we have been conditioned socially. Can you talk to us about a specific moment or experience that prompted you to write this book? Why did you write it?
Yeah, I don't know if there was one or if it was just it was a moment in my life where it was that kind of liminal space, right? Where I was like feeling the squeeze. And I thought to myself, I know that I'm not the only one here experiencing this. And I knew that because I had the community around me saying, nope, it's not just you, right? People who had come before me. And so I thought to myself, I want to start looking for books that help me put words to this. And I I found a lot of books, and I say this in the book too, I felt like I found books that kind of fell into two camps, right? There was a lot of these books that had been written by therapists and psychologists and people in the mental health field that felt very validating. And yet they also felt like they put all the ownership on making change on the mother, on the woman, right? So set boundaries, do this specific thing, right? Which is fair, but it kind of felt removed and it felt like it just stayed there. And then on the other side of that extreme, I felt like I saw these books that were very like rage and the anger and like fuck the patriarchy. And it was like, cool, I love this feeling, but like, what do I do with it? Right. It didn't give me any tangible. And so I was like, okay, I need to find somewhere in the middle. So I was struggling a lot in my early motherhood journey, which I'm technically still on, and my partnership journey. Right. And I started realizing how much the conditioning, even after doing years of therapy leading up to it, how much my codependency was kicking up, how much my people pleasing was kicking up, how much all of these things that I had worked so hard to dismantle were fully there in my face again. And also how much I was struggling just in general in my partnership. And I thought, oh my God, I have to look at this because it's not just me. This is so much bigger.
There's a phrase that I will say triggers me, and I have a really hard time with it. And I'm interested what you think about this phrase. And I realize this is kind of a leading question, so feel free to disagree with me. But personally, I hate the phrase good mother because I know for me, that phrase has caused a lot of stress in my life.
Hmm.
That tension between what I want to do, what I feel like I'm supposed to do. Am I a good mom? Am I a bad mom? I think if you're in a damaging romantic relationship, that's an easy weapon to lob at your
Yeah.
partner. How do you feel about that phrase?
Yeah, I mean, I would agree. I think that there's no such thing in a way because we're all such unique humans and our children are all such unique humans. This is where Bowlby would say it's the good enough mother and the importance of being the good enough mother and the kind of mental and emotional resilience that your children will have so long as you're able to be the good enough mother, that the good mother is actually a complete fallacy. Right. And that actually, I would say, for those of us who get trapped in the cycle that you're talking about, which is the cycle of shame and guilt and people pleasing and doing all the things to try to be the good mother, oftentimes it actually backfires because here's what I will say. This is probably hard for a lot of people to hear. When you're stuck in a state of doing everything you can so that you can feel like the good mother, typically that's actually not about your kids, that's about you.
It's about That's
That's
about
right.
us.
That's
Oh my
right.
god.
And here's what, just like any codependent behavior, whether
Oh
they
my
have the
god.
language to articulate it or they can really they sense it and they know it. And that has more of a negative impact long term than if you just show up as your messy self and know that you're going to be the good enough mother.
Gosh, it all comes back to the ego. I am, like, convinced. Like, all these things that we struggle with, it's like, "Oh, that's really about you. That's really about, like, how we see ourselves. It's not about what we think it is. It's about
Hmm.
something else entirely, usually your ego." Now, you also talk about something which I thought was really fascinating, the intersection between mother wound, sister wound, and witch wound. Can you walk us through what those terms mean and how it shows up in life?
Yeah. So I'm a history nerd. And so this book for me, for sure, was obviously, from reading it, was not just a book about, okay, this is where we're at now. It was like, I needed to understand how we got here. I think it's really important for all of us to understand how we got here because whether you're talking your individual history or more of like the social history, the cultural history, because what it helps me do is it helps me take the shame out of it, depersonalize it, and say, okay, I'm existing within a system that has set me up to be this way, right? It's not that I'm a bad person. It's not that I'm a bad mom. It's not that I'm failing. It's that I'm actually functioning exactly like this system intended me to function, right? So cool. Now that I understand that, I can depersonalize it and not get stuck in the shame loop. And now I can say, what am I going to do about it, right? And so there's some resistance, some almost like activism in saying, I refuse to participate in this anymore. So in my research, this understanding of like how we got here as mothers, I talked a lot about the Trinity wound. And so I went into the history of the witch trials and witches, right? So the witch wound. And then I talk about the sister wound and the mother wound. So the witch wound is really, and I say actually in the book how I was almost embarrassed to admit that I had never considered the epigenetic trauma that has been carried down in women around witches, right? Around the accusation around witches. But here's the thing, we know scientifically that epigenetic trauma is a thing, right? We can see it in the DNA of descendants of slaves. We can see it in the DNA of descendants of Holocaust survivors, right? Horribly traumatic things that happen, especially when not processed or kind of air quote healed, right, from, carries on in our lineage. So it would stand to reason that when tens of thousands of women, not just across Europe, by the way, Africa, Asia, North America, South America, in different ways, were going through this horrible time, and it's still happening in certain parts of Africa and Asia today around witch hunts, it would stand to reason that those of us that are here right now have that in our DNA, right? So, what is the witch wound? Well, it's the wound that teaches us that we can't be too big, can't be too loud, can't bring too much attention to ourselves, don't be too different, right? Because these were all surefire ways to get burned at the stake. And so it's in us, sure, socially, culturally, but you have to look at it as there's a level of like, we're starting from a base point of like, it's in my DNA, right? It's in my coding as a woman to not take up too much space because it can be dangerous, right? Then we move into the sister wound, which similar to the witch wound, created during these times when, we were going into this more patriarchal capitalistic structure, which is new in the grand scheme of our human history. And really what this did was it taught women to fear other women. Women can't be trusted, right? Because they might be the reason why somebody says that you're a witch. There's almost only so much to go around. We have to compete with each other, right? And it was actually a way for those systems to come in, break up our communities, break up our bonds, stick us in a house, right? Put us in the home and keep us controllable. Because when we're together, we have a lot of power. And so when the systems that be started coming in and getting a foothold, controlling and disbanding that power was really important, right? So now here we are, our day and age, still living with the sister wound. And then the mother wound, right? So the mother wound kind of makes up that trinity, which is generations, thousands of years of patriarchal wounding carried on from mother to daughter, from mother to daughter, from mother to daughter, not just actually to daughter, I'll say to son too, in a different way. It shows up in a different way. We're all acting out these patriarchal wounds. And so the way that that impacts us as we're parenting can't be overlooked, right? It's part of how we got here today. So long-winded, but that's kind of the breakdown of the three different wounds that I see kind of coming together in this trinity that we have to be able to look at and dismantle now so that we can move forward in a different way.
Well, I think it is a great concept to help understand our lives. I will say that part got me thinking pretty hard. In my family, I had a moment where I realized, both my grandfathers were abusers. My
Mhm.
dad was an abuser. Once I connected the dots on that, like,
Yes,
wow, there is a whole history. And I believe this is how you phrased it actually in your book, systems designed to control and punish women.
that's right.
Once you start to like connect the dots through generations, through history, it is not just you. It is a whole system that exists, and it helps you understand your own emotional state. And you're right. It does make it was helpful to me in thinking about how I parent my own daughters, what I am bringing to that table, what am I passing down? And my hope is
Mm,
that, it's getting better. Like I will say in my family, they divorced the person that was
mhm.
abusing them. So it is getting better. We're going to
That's
get to
right.
the point where we choose the person that's not an abuser in the first place. So we don't have to get a divorce. But I think when you start to think about how all these things connect together and there's a history there, it's a little overwhelming, I will be honest. It just feels so much bigger than even your own experience, but it informs you in a way that you can make a difference in your own life. So I think it's a super helpful concept.
Yeah, and look, when you talk about like divorce, right? I mean, we know this. Women couldn't have their own bank account in the States until what, 1978. So
Yeah,
if
we were alive, or I was
yeah,
alive.
that's right. Like our mothers and our grandmothers did not have that. Most of them did not have that as an
Yeah,
option, right?
right,
And to see that and to recognize that in like a human to human way, that so often there was so much damage done because they couldn't leave, but they couldn't leave. Not that they
right.
didn't want to leave, right? And so I think that's important. I think humanizing the ones who came before us is a big step also in dismantling the trauma that gets passed down. But also, I think this idea that, to your point, it can be really overwhelming. You're right. It can be really overwhelming. It's both liberating and overwhelming at the same time, right?
Well, it gives me such a feeling of grief and sadness for all the
Yes.
women that came
Yes.
before, because this
Same.
is really the first generation that had full access to divorce
Same. Yep, I agree
and the ability to run
wholeheartedly.
your own life.
I 100% agree. And I'll tell you too, and I hope people hear this. This book, while through the lens of obviously I'm a cishet, woman, and it's through the lens of being a mother, this book is about men too. And it's really
Yeah,
important for us to
yeah.
understand that these systemic issues are not just impacting women, right? When we talk about these dominator systems, patriarchy, capitalism, white supremacy, colonialism, these impact men just as negatively as they impact women. Because yes, women might be, let's say, to use your examples of being in relationships with abusers, the women might be the abusers. But what happened to the men to create within them the ability to be an abuser, right? Like there is trauma there. There is suffering there. And I don't think it helps us to minimize or to push that suffering away and say, well, it's not as important as those of us who are at the hands of the abuser. It's like we've got to stop looking at things like that. It's got to stop being like the men versus women because we're never going to heal this stuff if we keep doing that?
It's all, rotten fruit from the same tree.
That's right. That's right.
Now, in writing this book, I was really impressed by you because in this book, I think you show a lot of integrity because you put your own skin in the game and you share some of your own vulnerabilities, which I don't think everybody does. Like,
Mm,
you didn't ask anything of other people that you didn't require of yourself.
mm,
And you're very vulnerable, particularly the opening scene of the book. I'm like, oh my God, every woman has been there. Like, I so get
yeah.
it. So get it. Were there any hard emotional truths that you uncovered for yourself in writing this book?
Yeah. I find that even now, it's been over a year since I wrote it and put it out there. People will say, "Oh, remember that part in the book where you wrote this?" And I'm like, "Oh God, like I forgot about
I
that."
did do
It's almost
that.
like you put it out there and you forget about it once it's there.
Black it out.
Uh,
Huh.
I have to give my husband actually a lot of credit too for like allowing all of this to be out there because so many of the situations that I write about obviously include him too, right? For him to be able to see himself and see the patriarchal woundings and how that shows up and say, sure, write about it. This is going to be helpful to people. I don't think that any of these things that I wrote about, I am 100% healed from, right? To go back to even what you were saying, I don't really believe that we ever get 100% healed. I think this is a lifelong journey. It's life school. And I think that we edge towards more evolution, right? And more awareness and integration. But even the things that I write about, sure, I'm looking at them maybe from a different perspective than I did in the time, but they still show up. I still say yes when I want to say no. And then I catch myself and I'm like, oh, that again, you know? So I think that was also important for me to put out there, talk about integrity is I'm not coming down looking at you from above, wagging my finger, right? It's like, no, been there, done that, and also still struggling with.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and it really is a good example of, a big learning that I have had in my life lately. The things that are the hardest for me to share are the things I most need to share. It's
Yeah,
not
because I'll
oversharing.
benefit. Hmm.
It's not oversharing. Like, if there's something that is really it's okay to talk about these things. It's
Yeah.
okay to talk about these hard things, these things that you're embarrassed to talk about or that you have a lot of shame around because, at least for me, without fail, if I have started talking about these things I feel ashamed of or they're really hard for me to bring up, without fail, whoever I'm talking to about it says, "Oh, I get it. I
Yeah.
100% get it. I have been there. That happened to me." You are not like the value of knowing that you are not alone and connecting to other people, that what you're feeling can be worked through
Hmm.
is vital, I think.
And this is why I'm such a huge proponent of and believer in group work. And this is why when I started leading groups in 2020, I've never looked back, right? Because I look at group work as almost like the rocket fuel underneath our individual work. Because again, this idea of being witnessed and the importance as a human animal that we have on being witnessed, but also in witnessing others and hearing our story in other people and how that immediately strips away the shame. I think it is so important that we connect the group with the individual, right? And that could look like you being in community, to your point, and like having a cup of tea with like three friends and talking about it. But it's so important that we witness and be witnessed so that we stop thinking that it's just us and that something's wrong with us because that is how these systems keep going. They
Yeah,
keep
you get
functioning
stuck.
on the backs of the shame. That's it. Like without the shame, they can't function, period.
Well, that's great. I have one big question for you at the before we fully wrap up, and this is a big one, so you're going to take a moment to think about it. With everything you've been through this year, like, I have to imagine this has been one of the biggest years of your entire life.
Big one.
What do you know for sure?
What do I know for sure? What I know for sure is that no matter what, I've got me. No matter what, I can always find safety and security within myself, not in like a hyper individual way, but I've worked really, really hard to find home within myself so that I'm not putting that on other people as an expectation, right? Or as more of like a parental need. And so I think that's the thing that I know the most is like, no matter what's happening out there, I can always come back in here and I can find my way back to myself and to being like okay, even when I'm not okay.
Thank you. I
Yeah.
am so appreciative of you making the time to be here today. I think this is going to help a lot of people,
Yeah.
for you sharing your story. Thank you for being
Thank you,
willing to
Heather.
be so open and vulnerable about it. Now, if people want to find you because they want to work with you or they want to hear more from you, where can they go?
Yeah. So they can go to my website, vanessabennett.com. I'm mostly on Instagram, Vanessa S. Bennett. I have a love-hate relationship with social right now, so I've been kind of going dark for a while. I think a lot of us are feeling it. But, website is where most of my offerings are. I have a community. I have a depth coaching academy that I run. I do a lot of things, Substack, all that jazz. So spinning all the plates, but you can find it all on my website.
Perfect. And I will link that in the show notes so it's easy for everyone to find you. Thank you to all of you for listening today to the show, especially to those of you that are on your own journey. And we hope you have a great week.
Thank you, Heather.